What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Salty Dogs Podcast.
Yo, yo.
Jason here, and we got Christopher Cern at the table.
Got me here. We also got our buddy Travis Roberts with the District Church. He's
What's
here
up?
hanging out with
What's
us.
up?
Yeah, he's going to be helping us kick off our church planner discussion series.
So we're pretty stoked about
Yeah,
that.
we're stoked about that. But before we do all that stuff,
Yeah.
Chris, you usually have a nice little question to ask.
Oh, God. You know what? That's so funny. I haven't even been thinking about these topics anymore and bantering at the beginning and talking about all of that stuff.
All the fun
I'll
stuff.
tell you what I've been thinking about a lot lately.
Tell me about it.
Stay-at-home dads that might be a part of the audience. Being a stay-at-home dad is hard. It's not easy, and I'm sure being a stay-at-home mom
I think you got like
is hard
one.
too.
You got one amen out of all those
you
listeners.
got one. Yeah.
You got one.
Being a stay-at-home parent is extremely difficult. I was just talking to my buddy Kyle, Kyle, the other day, and we were at the park with our kids, a couple of stads, and we were hanging out, and we were just talking about how all we do is feel like we clean the same things over and over and over and over again all day. And I just tell Ellie not to bring her stuffed animal out, and she's got like 50. It's a whole deal. So on top
You're stuck in the grind.
Yes, doing that on top of running a photography business and then pastoring and
Look, we
and
know you're a
graphic
photographer
design
already.
and all that stuff.
We know, Chris.
So dude, the grind never stops. But that's
The
what I've
grind
been
never
thinking
stops.
about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, you wouldn't know anything about that.
I wouldn't know about the
You
stay-at-home
actually
parent
follow
grind.
the biblical paradigm of leading your family and
That's right.
from
I'm
the
the
outside.
I'm the umbrella.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm not
I'm
even
the dad
umbrella.
umbrella.
I'm like a goulash.
Have you seen that?
I have not. I don't think so.
You haven't seen
No.
that graph? It's like God as an umbrella, then Father
okay.
as an
Yeah,
umbrella.
yeah.
That whole thing. And
Yep. Yep.
anyways, I see the value in it, but I could also pick it apart, but I'm not going to.
Right.
Yeah. Hey, Chris.
Yes.
I have a gift for you. If
A GIF
you,
or a
a
gift?
gift. I have a gift
No, a
for you.
GIF?
No, GIFT.
Okay. What is it?
Yeah, and let's just settle the matter. Now, I know that the creator of the GIF actually pronounces it GIF, but
And he should have used a J.
he should have used a J, but he didn't want it to be peanut butter brand. It needed to be
I get that.
animated. So it's graphics, right?
Gotcha.
GIF, graphics. So I call it
Ah.
GIF. Anyways, I have a gift for you.
Yeah, what is
And
it?
so if you're listening, you actually have to go back to Facebook and watch this because I want to see the look on Chris's face when I give him this gift.
What is the gift?
So, recently we've been talking about some controversial topics on the
Right.
on the podcast.
Yeah.
And I just thought I wanted to be the good Christian brother and lovingly bring some correction into your life. And so I have a book for you.
Oh gosh.
Oh,
I'm
is this a
so afraid
Smackdown?
right now. What is
Are we
it?
right
It's
in the middle
called
of a Smackdown?
Introducing Christian Doctrine.
I already have that book.
And so it's the second edition.
I have that book.
You do have
Yeah.
this book?
Hold
Well,
on.
here,
You
need
have
another
it.
one because
I don't need
apparently
another one.
You have
apparently
it, but have
haven't-
you read it?
Have you read it?
I have not.
You
Okay.
haven't. And so I just need you to read through that. And I
Did
need
you just
to
go through your bookshelf?
I need you to come in line, brother, with traditional Christian doctrine. And so get on it.
Can you catch
Can
me
I
up
just-
on this?
can I just say that I believe
Was there going off the rails at some point that I need to be aware of?
It's-
Am I next
it's-
to a heretic?
Travis, yes.
Well,
yeah. Yes.
probably almost heretical.
Yeah. No, man, and this is kind of funny because, Travis, we were coming in and we were like, kind of telling him like, have you ever listened to the podcast? Do you know what you're getting yourself into? And he's like, nope. Travis just trusts us and believes it's good. And the bars are going to come down on the doors here pretty soon. You're going to get strapped in the seat and you're not going to be able to run away. But
Whoa.
Wow.
Too much.
no,
That's where the doctrine's off.
And he's in the basement of a long dark hallway
Right.
in the bottom of a church.
in Wichita.
In Wichita,
Not
Kansas.
a good thing.
Yeah.
So to go back to we'll talk about this.
Let's talk about it.
I think so for us, I think some people would hear some of the things that we talk about and think that just entertaining different ideas or different thought processes automatically assumes that we're drinking some sort of Kool-Aid or when really we really value conversation and exploring things. I know that I've undergone a pretty interesting, I'm sure you're familiar with the word deconstruction,
Right.
But
Yep.
After the first job that I worked at a church, it's almost like you get this peek behind, the real
The ministry
side,
curtain.
the ministry curtain. You get
Yeah.
a peek behind it, and so there were some things that I saw back there that I was like, oh man, like I didn't realize this is how it was going to be. And I mean, we're actually kind of already getting into our topic, but I didn't realize things were going to be that they were. Not to say that everything was bad and terrible, but there were things that were said and conversations that were had. I'm like, man, is this really the focus of what we're doing? And so it's almost like I've seen some things. I've had some battle stories, and it's like, man, I can't help but believe that this isn't the way that Jesus wanted things to be. And so from that, we'll have conversations about current expressions of the church and things like that. Now, I will say that, and I was just having a conversation today with someone about this podcast being like almost a sounding board for my faith and where I've come and how Jesus is bringing me through it. So I don't know how wise that is to a lot of people, but I will say that it's been really valuable, and I'm a verbal processor as it is, and so it's been extremely helpful for me. I know that I've had friends, other people write us in that have said, hey, it's great to know that there's someone else that feels this way and that's processing the things that I'm processing. And so I guess I'd pretty much say nothing's off the table for us to have a conversation about.
Well, it's funny, like that deconstruction word it's a buzzword. It's like super popular. But what I think happens a lot with deconstruction is people will deconstruct certain ideas, or they'll deconstruct themselves, but then they never reconstruct anything in the aftermath. And so it's almost like, so I grew up and Rob Bell was like Numa video popular.
Right.
He was like the great reformer of the evangelical church, and he taught us to question.
Right.
But he didn't teach us to come to any solution. So he taught us how to like critique things and look at things and ask, is this the best way? Which was really refreshing. And at the time, the most conservative Bible-believing churches.
We're just like decade late Rob Bells.
Yeah. We're lowercase r.
Dang it, Travis.
But then because you don't want to just be, I've got all the answers.
Yeah.
Because we don't,
Yeah.
But you also don't want to land in the, I question everything all the time, and so follow me. Well, where am I going to follow you?
Right,
because you just ask questions, that kind of shit.
And I think that's what everybody wants to be different, but I think that that's something that we really do try to implement into every episode. Is regardless of the topic that we challenge, whether we're talking about divorce or inerrancy or in one of 1,000 different topics, we want to bring some sort of action step and some sort of resolution.
Well,
we want to try to tie it up and not just leave people hanging. Like,
it's always go talk to Jesus and see what he tells you.
And that's almost always the answer.
Seriously, that's almost always the answer. So that was just a joke. I was putting some books away earlier, and I found that Christian Doctrine book. I said, I'm going to give it to Chris.
It's funny because I already have it.
You do?
Yeah.
But you haven't read it.
But he hadn't read it.
I haven't read it.
Michael Scott.
Don't you know you just got to have a nice, pretty bookshelf with lots of books on it.
Yeah, so deconstruction is a pretty popular topic, and we brought up the word kind of last episode. And we're kind of dancing around some. I actually don't like the word.
Just a lot of negative connotations.
Well, it's like the word Christian. It carries so much weight. But then now if you're a deconstructionist within Christianity, it has its own set of weight.
Somebody will immediately go, "Oh, you're."
Oh, because you get compartmentalized real quick.
You're almost better to say like, "Man, I'm just on a journey right now with Jesus, and I'm praying through some stuff." I mean,
and for the most part, that's the truth. Right. Yeah, like
it's also like the hipster, but it's a Christian word.
It's like
it's not a secular word. It's not a word out in the world. It's a word that we use as Christians, like millennial Christians use it, and
nobody else is really using that
word. You don't walk in with a group of like mechanics and say, "Man, like I'm just deconstructing a lot right now." Like, what do you mean?
I'm desecularizing. Yeah, I coined the term you guys heard on the Salty Nuts podcast.
Desecularizing.
So before we dive too far in, let's take a moment and we'll pass the salt.
I thought you were going to say pray. We already prayed though.
Hey, remember we did the Devo last time?
We did.
I dropped that
Daily
on you.
Devo.
Wow.
And we actually do pray before our podcast. I don't know if people actually know.
We are Christian.
We do pray. We do love Jesus. But you know what's funny is like we always have to justify. Like I know I just said that, but I really do love Jesus, right? Like at some point we're just going to have to stop doing the things that we need to follow up with. Yeah. I really do love Jesus.
This week's salt ties in exactly to what we're talking to.
So our last episode we asked the question, is something missing? And basically like, have you ever asked the question in a church service, in your faith, or whatever it is? Like, I've done the things, I've gone to the Bible studies, I've done the 101, I signed the paper, I volunteer, I give my 10%, and you feel like you're kind of in that place like, man, something's missing, And so we kind of address some of that and our journey.
Talk about a gray area, like kind of sometimes feeling like maybe you're in limbo with like, man, I know I'm on this journey with Jesus right now, and I'm just in a place to where I don't know what's next. I don't know what he's got for me next. So you're kind of like in this limbo space to where it's like, man, I don't know what God's going to do right now, but it's a little scary. Like I hope that I'm coming up to this next juncture of faith.
Yeah.
Right. So we actually got an email, and we're not going to read the entire email, but we want to give a shout out to a guy named Jared. And it's the first email we received in a couple of weeks, but it was really encouraging. And he took some time to really...
It was a long one, man.
Write some things out, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, and long, when I say it was long, I don't mean that in a negative way. It was great to get someone's thoughts like that, Jared, you took the time to write all this out. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. So let me just read the last part. I think he'll be fine with this because I'm not giving anything away. He just says, thank you so much for for addressing this issue. You can imagine how refreshing it was to hear this last episode based on what he said he was going through.
Right.
And he says, it is a growing issue that needs to be talked about. I feel like you guys were talking about my situation. Please continue to talk about this no matter how much flack you get for it. You don't know how exciting it is for me to know that there are people out there who can question these things, but still approach it from a biblical point of view and ultimately in grace and love. Keep up the good work. So that was super encouraging.
Yeah. You sent that bad boy late. I think it was like 11.
Yeah. I got it late. I got it like at 10 o'clock, and so I shot it over to you. So anyways, just know that we do appreciate the feedback, and we do take the time to read the emails. I could get better about taking the time to responding. It's been crazy lately, but I did shoot Jared a quick message and said,
all you said was thanks. And you didn't even use a vowel. You just said THX.
Yeah, right.
Period. Like you didn't even...
I just responded K. That stuff drives me nuts, man.
Gosh.
Jared, I hope that the Lord will bless you with the rosiest of cheeks.
You get those and you wear them with pride, brother.
That's right. Wear that flattery. Wear that flattery. So, all right. Well, let's dive into the meat of the conversation. Yeah,
I'm all about the meat. Let's do it.
So, what are we talking? Let's talk a little bit, real quick, about our desire to actually do a church planting series.
Yeah. Well, I think for us, I mean, everybody here at the table has church planting background experience, whether that was helping start one. Did you ever help start one, like at a volunteer level? No, you were always kind of like
the guy.
Yeah, the guy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but yeah, we've all had. So I'm a previous youth pastor. That was my first step into the church planting circle. You as a
campus pastor, church planter, whatever.
And then Travis is the main dude.
Yeah.
The main guy. So we all have this. Yeah, we all have this.
The guy.
We all had this passion, I think, for. I think when you boil it down to taking serious the Great Commission, to try to reach people and lead them to Jesus. And so we've all had this this background. And so I think for me and you, we have a lot of conversations about the climate of church and different expressions and things like that. And so I know that we sometimes tend to lean on the saltier side. And so my desire with this conversation was to try to find a balanced view to it's like, listen, we don't want to dump on church planning, or we don't want to, come out swinging negative or anything like that. But what we want to do is we want to get guys, friends that we know and have that are, laboring to make things happen, to share Jesus. So we wanted to have a conversation around church planning.
Yeah. So we definitely want to try and tackle it from different areas or different viewpoints. Like, we want to talk to somebody who's going to start a church plant,
or wanting
to plant that hasn't launched. Somebody who's in it, which Travis, you bring that to the table today, and then somebody who has actually had to shut down a location or has quit the ministry or whatever,
or passed on the church, they just stepped down, or
they were
like
in
that.
it, now they're not, and kind of talk about that entire process, which I could bring a lot to the table on that, I think. But if I were to really be open and honest in some of that,
no one cares about
nobody cares about me. I do want to get some other viewpoints. But Travis, so do people call you Pastor Travis?
Every now and then.
PT?
Pastor T?
PT, yeah.
Do they call you PT?
No, they don't call me T.
No, they need to.
What about Mr. T?
No, I'm not big enough.
You're tall enough, bro.
I'm not big enough. I'm not black enough.
For
Can we say that on the Salty Dogs?
You can say whatever you want, brother. So, you guys don't know this. Maybe if you're watching, I got to talk about your height. Travis, and I made this joke earlier, he has Nephilim status height.
That's right.
He's a tall dude, both you and your brother. Your parents must have fed you guys well, man.
They did. I mean, we always had Cheetos in the pantry. So
is that the trick?
Dude.
It's just, it didn't matter what you eat. You just got to keep eating.
6'4" with cheesy fingers.
Yeah.
Oh, man. There you
That's
go.
awesome. So we got Pastor Travis. with the District Church. And so you can check out more about their church at thedistrictchurchwichita.com. I'm sure you can find them on Facebook and Instagram and all that fun stuff. And so tell us just a little bit about, real quick, your context. Tell us about the District Church, where you meet, and
the community
that you're in, and just kind of give us a State of the Union address. Like, what are you guys doing right now, and how are things going? And then after that, I want to dive into why or how you knew you were called to plant.
Cool.
So have at it, bro.
So,
good to have you. Thank you.
Yeah, guys, thanks for having me on. Super looking forward to this. Sure. Obviously, when you're in the middle of it, it's a huge passion, and you think that you've got perspective on it and all that kind of stuff. But I'm excited just to have the conversation. So we started the District Church October 2017. We call it the District Church because we're in the Delano District. We have a heart to be a neighborhood church. We say in and for Delano all the time. We really mean that. What we mean by that is that we want to be in the neighborhood, but not just doing church in the neighborhood. We also want to be for the neighborhood of Delano. So the businesses, the new baseball stadium, all of the schools, neighbors, you name it. Like, if it's on the ground happening in Delano, we just want to be a part of it. We don't want to necessarily run it. We don't want to be the creators of anything. We just want to say, hey, we'd love to come and be a part of, any kind of party that's going on, any kind of hangout that's going on, anything the schools need. So that's been our heart from day one. My brother and I started it together, Brady, and we decided that if we were really going to live out in and for Delano, we needed to move into the neighborhood. And so I live about a block south of where we meet for church.
You mean you didn't go to like Augusta or
Actually, the church planning organization I work with, Stadia, amazing organization, but a lot of their motto would be go to neighborhoods that are growing quickly.
Right.
Larger populations, and find people that are just like you, and go and just plant yourself there. But in our heart of hearts, we wanted to go to a place where you could drive through and not even say a word and just say, this is why we need a church here. And so when we were moving in, we had churches closing down in the neighborhood. And so we more related to like a Nehemiah who like looked over the wall that surrounded Jerusalem, and it was all broken down. And we said, this is where we want to lay our lives.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of our heart for going into Delano. Was we saw a lot of death, dying, struggling churches. We saw a landscape that, the meth problem in Delano, and just center of Wichita. So we're on the ground and just understand the needs of Delano big time. Like, we mentor a lot in the schools. So Franklin Elementary, West High, Hamilton Middle School, Allison Magnet. We just believe strongly in being a presence for our teachers, for our principals, for our students. And we have in Delano a higher single parent population in the homes, higher renter population, so transient community. But we didn't want to come in and be like, hey, we're here to
like the saviors.
Yeah. That's not our heart. Our heart was like, we want to do everything with you. So go to school with you, go to the same gym you'd go to, go to the same restaurant. Delano's a food desert, so there's not a grocery store in the neighborhood.
But lots of places to eat out.
Lots of places to eat out, and they're because they're local, they're a little bit more expensive, and so a lot of the local neighborhood actually doesn't eat in Delano. They go to Brahms, they go to McDonald's, but they don't go to the Monarch. They don't go down and get dessert.
Picasso,
any
of those places. Yeah.
Which is super interesting because Delano, for those of you guys that are aren't in our city, it's a pretty trendy place. Like when you get past Seneca, and then it's kind of like some of a lot of the revitalization is kind of not really pushing past that, but there's a really trendy part of the city.
What do they call? What's gentrification? Is that what it's called?
Gentrification, yeah. When a vibrant part of the city kind of moves into a lower income area, it tends to force that lower income even further out because they can't afford rent prices. The cost of living goes way up.
Do you feel like that's true of Delano?
Yeah, I think it is, but I think in the next 5 years you'll see it happen more and more because landlords are going to spike rent. Because they can. Especially with that stadium going up. Yeah. Well, and then you see there's even a whole, side of the street right next to the stadium where the city's asking a lot of its residents just, hey, we just need you to move because we want to take that and make it parking.
Right.
That's gentrification. That's
Sure.
and so there's problems coming on that end. And you already have like West High. It has the highest truancy rate in all of Wichita. So kids just
Wow.
don't go
Did not know that.
go to school, right?
And it's like right across the freeway.
Yeah,
And it's crazy.
It's
Yeah.
right there. It's kind of like you almost drive by and you kind of forget like West High is right there. It's just south of downtown.
Yeah.
It's right there. It's really in the heart of everything, but it's got a high truancy rate, highest, like I said, in USD 259. So when we heard things like that, we were like, a good leader solves problems, and I think good churches do the same. I think that's what our whole goal was a neighborhood church. We didn't want to, when we say neighborhood church, we don't mean like we're just in the neighborhood and we just, you can walk here. What we mean is like we want to know what's going on in that neighborhood.
Sure. Yeah.
And we always want to have our ear to the ground so that if anybody's like, we're trying to bring solutions to Delano, we want to be a part of the conversation
Right.
and work with everyone else to make it happen.
Yeah, I would say that when we were up in the north side of Wichita, we kind of took that approach, and we were that way, for sure. Like more of a neighborhood church than anything, and so, yeah. Talk to me about Chris. Did you have something?
Nope.
Okay, I want to know the story, man. Tell me how, because Christopher and I, we were gonna have I call him Christopher, Chris. We were gonna have a conversation at one point about the idea of calling. Because a lot of people say, "Oh, I feel called to this. I feel called to that. I feel called to this," and it's kind of a buzzword. It's it's the green light we get. Like I really feel called. Like I have to go do this. And I believe there's a lot of sincerity behind that. But anyways, I want to know, like, how do you know that you were called to start a new church? Like, give me that story.
I mean, that's a long story, but when I first got married, I've been married 8 years.
Okay.
My wife sat down. I was a youth pastor at the time, and about 2 months before I get married, she's like, "Hey, I don't want to be a youth pastor's wife.
I want to be a
like-
church
I was
planter's
like-
wife."
I was like, cool. We're still getting married because I'm a youth pastor,
Yeah.
But that night we prayed about, God, I think something's different for us in the future. And so about 6 months into being married, I was working at Riverlawn Christian Church at the time. Huge shout out to Riverlawn. And they actually knew of our heart to go and potentially plant with a group of friends of ours in Nagoya, Japan. And so they even helped us get over there to interview with this team. But at the same time, Riverlawn was kind of offering in this discipleship role. And for us, the timing was discipleship role. That's what we were ready for.
Yeah.
And we were like 5 or 6 months into being married. We weren't ready for that huge of a jump. And so that was our first taste of church planting. Though we went over to Japan and we saw everybody who, like, I think it's 99.5% of people not Christian.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking no one that they hardly know are Christian people. And so everywhere they went when they went to the post office, when they went to the grocery store, when they went to a ball game, it's like on mission all the time. Like they're leaving their seats to go grab popcorn, and they're like, let's pray that we run into somebody that we could start a conversation with. And I felt like I'm kind of a quiet Christian. Like I like to go into church and like even be somewhat quiet so that not a lot of people will come up and talk or ask questions. And it just convicted me, like, man, these people live so intentionally. So I literally, I went home and like, and even made a little painting that said "Live like a church planter," just because I was so convicted, and hung up on our living room wall.
Yeah.
But with full intentions, just to being a discipleship pastor and living more intentionally. So we kind of do that, and then 3 or 4 years later, we're like, man, we really continue to feel called. And the church where I was working said, "Hey, are you still feeling that?" And I said, "Yeah, I think we are." And they came behind us and said, "Let's go through the process of sending us to an assessment." So we went to Vegas for our assessment, which is kind of funny,
They basically are like, "All right, let's see if they sin."
Yeah,
That's the assessment.
much.
They really for about a week, they're just pulling back your history, your past, all the layers. They're seeing, they're pulling back your character, but they're also testing your skill. Yeah. So if you're a crappy preacher, they're gonna tell you, and they're gonna tell you things, ways to work on it. And at the end of that week, it's this real big, heavy, like you're about to meet with people, and they're gonna tell you whether they affirm you, and say, hey, go right now. They give you the yellow light, which is like, we think you should go, but you need a little bit of training, or no, you should never church plant, So we got the yellow light because we were like, we think that you're a church planter, but we think that you've never been in any church plant circles. I didn't grow up around a church plant. I didn't know what that was until college.
Yeah.
I started to get the passion for it after getting married,
Were you encouraged or discouraged by that process?
I was encouraged by the process, but I was discouraged that it was like, hey, we think you should plant, but you need some time of training. Right. That's what I was discouraged by, because I was, I'm like, no, I can go right now,
Yeah.
But I came back and we worked it out where I was kind of the interim lead pastor at Riverlawn for a summer, and that was my training, basically to be a lead. It really wasn't church plant training,
but senior pastor kind of training.
Right. It's really hard to get that church plant training. But I would say this, as far as it's a roundabout way to get to that calling question. For us, we felt called by God, and I always believe when you're called vertically, He always affirms it horizontally.
Right.
The people of God always affirm the call. Mm-hmm. And so if I ever hear somebody tell me that they're called to do something, I would say, I know that God told you that, or you believe God told you that. Who else told you that? Who else came along and affirmed it? Who in your life did you ask specifically and say, do you see this in me? And they said, without a doubt, we do, or we don't, that kind of thing. And I had a lady, the strangest occurrences happen. I had a lady come up after I preached one Sunday, and she said, hey, I think you should start churches. And I thought she was just being very nice and just being just giving a compliment.
Yeah.
Turns out she was in town to do a perspectives class in Newton, and she'd been planting churches for like 30 years. So I was like, oh,
Crazy.
Man, there's some weight to that.
Yeah.
Another guy that when I first started interest in Japan, he now worked for Mustard Seed in New York, and he had emailed me, hey, are you still interested in planting? Because I'd love for you to, pick a city and we'll be your organization, that kind of thing. So there was multiple things like that happening, but there was also on the local level, elders and pastors that I respected who said, we see this in you, mm-hmm. and we will get behind you.
Sure.
And so this is where I think we get too much, and I'm probably more on this than I probably should be, but one of the most dangerous lines in the church is God told me. I struggle with that line a lot, because I think in Scripture it's not it's a supernatural thing to have happen, but I don't think it's an isolated incident that no one has the know on. I think the entire church has to be a part of that process, and I think it has to be affirmed on a lot of different levels. I think the call, it's not just the voice of God telling me to go, it's the people affirming it, and then it's the people not just affirming it, saying, we can see that. Because my question back to them is, if you can see me being a church planter, will you back me with your support? And if they don't back me with their support, either prayerful,
it's almost like
financial,
it's invalid or something.
Right. Like, we live in the American Idol generation where you go and try out for American Idol, and you don't find out that you're a bad singer until you're in front of judges, because your parents and your friends never told you.
Yeah, right.
And so as a planter, you want as many people to be as honest with you as you can, and not just affirm saying, yeah, you're a great preacher, or yeah, you're a great leader, but I support you to the point where I will put my money where my mouth is. Mm-hmm. That's affirmation of the call.
For sure.
I will join your team. That's affirmation of the call. I think they're much more substantial examples of how God affirms the call than just a spirit movement. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
you guys can push back on that. That's just my opinion on how the call goes. And I see a lot of guys get into planting because they felt the call, but they never saw it. They never saw the call affirmed through the people of God and through an organization and through.
Right. I can understand. I can understand that. I mean, we know. We just had a conversation the other day. I was talking to a buddy of mine, and I think we even talked about this yesterday, or it was yesterday. We got together for lunch. I think on the other part of the table, we had a conversation about calling and about like planting a church, and we got on this topic of like, how do you know that you failed or it was a failure or something like that? So we started to get along this topic, and a question I think my buddy Kyle, that's actually, he might be still watching, brought up to me. He asked me, he's like, if somebody feels like they're called to do something, does that mean that it's going to be successful?
Yeah, right.
Like, does that mean that, like, can God call you to do something, or is that just like us putting our expectations on what that call is? Like, is
Right.
it possible to answer some sort of call and it's not going to have the payout that you think it's going to have, or it's going to go the direction that you think it's going to go? That doesn't negate the calling. It just,
Right.
we assume that means, like, if I'm called, it's almost like, you know, like when you drift or you get behind a car. What do they call that? And you're like, drafting. Yeah. Like there's like
Yep.
okay, so you're like riding behind them and they're taking all the resistance. It's almost like if you answer the call, it's like, I'm going to be behind God, and it's like I'm almost on this fast track and everything I touch is going to succeed, and it's just going to take off, and it's often, I don't want to say it's often not that way, but it normally doesn't look that way for a lot of people, at least in the way that they have it maybe fantasized, or the, you know, they thought it was going to be like glamorized. Maybe that's a better word
for it. We talked about that one time.
Right.
Glamorizing ministry.
But this
thinking
idea,
it's going to be this thing, and then it's not.
This idea of call,
idealism, and
right.
I mean,
but
huge.
I mean, there were things that I thought I definitely felt called to do earlier in my life, and I don't know if those were necessarily me just feeling real good about it, or having a spiritual high from a camp or from a retreat or something, you know. But I mean, I definitely can own that I might have at some point in my life misheard or read, like, God's like, I didn't tell you to do that. That's all you. Like, that's your desire. Nope. I'll be there for you, but I did not tell you to go and start that, you know, Bible study or whatever.
So you bring up a good segue point. What do you think is what? Maybe don't make a statement that is going to be a blanket statement, but for you, and maybe the Lord has revealed this to you or those around you, whatever conversation you have, what is your idea of a successful church plant? Like, you look at the district church and you are saying, man, you know what? I feel like we're having some success right now. Like, what does that look like?
The word I use for success, and I think it's a kingdom mindset for success, is faithfulness.
Okay, good.
Faithfulness is the benchmark for success, and faithfulness doesn't always look like what the world would deem successful.
Okay. Yep.
But I do counterweight that with what I think most Christian leaders lack is the ability to succeed or lead well in a results-driven environment.
Yes.
We do not want to, we want to grow, but we don't want to be in a results-driven environment where there's accountability toward, you need to do this, or it's we're not going to keep going after it. And there's a tension there between, I've got to be faithful and then results-driven in some way, shape, or form.
I like the word counterweight that you use there. I think that's...
What do you think is the best way to navigate that? Because I'll just tell you, like, I was very, very results. Like, we wanted the full building. We wanted to hit the number. We need to have this much giving by this amount of time, which means we have to have this many people, and we want this many people in groups. And there were metrics that drove us. But again, we shut down a location. And our last Sunday, we had 138 people in the building. So, like, you know, that's where I come from. So I know that life. And so what the Lord taught me after that situation was exactly what you said.
Yeah.
Is that I measure it as faithfulness, right? Ezekiel, he was given a mandate by God to go and speak to a stubborn people. And he was successful in living out what the Lord called him to do. And he was actually successful in not reaching the people with the message the way that God told him that he would reach them, right?
Right.
So that expectation of success in that instance, it fails every time, because God wasn't saying you're going to go preach to 1 million stubborn, hard-hearted people and they're going to repent.
Well, we live in a culture right now where there's one measure of success that's visible to the eye and the common churchgoer, and that is, are you big?
Right.
That is it.
Right.
Like
right.
and many people say, well, but it's also about new life in the Lord and all those kinds of things. But there is
But how big are you?
How big are you?
How many are you running, Travis?
That's exactly right. Which is the most scary question any church planter can get asked. Whenever a church planter is asked that question, it's like, oh gosh, let me bring up all the kingdom things I can bring up and not talk about.
Well,
let
me tell you what God did in our life group this last week.
Yeah,
this lady was possessed, and we delivered her.
And so in that,
that's just a random thing.
But in that culture, it's
we
really hard.
defeated Legion in group last week.
It's really hard to be faithful to your original mission when that's the common metric. And so there has to be this over communication of our vision, our value, what we really and not even so. I love, like, church planters are guys who they call themselves visionaries, but visionaries are few and far between. Church planters are just people who are the vision.
They're literally
right?
the carriers.
Now,
of the
yeah,
if
so
Elon
you
Musk started a church, I'd be like, that guy's a visionary.
Right. I mean, those kind of guys. I mean, and it's not that we can't, but most of us are just kind of picking up the scraps of other people's table and trying to do our best with moving it forward as creatively as we can.
Right.
That doesn't make us visionaries.
Sure.
It could make us faithful, right? And so I think that's the big thing for me, is that I'm called to be faithful. And so in our context, for us to be successful, it's
butts and bucks.
We have to be answering the community's problems.
Right.
We have to be at the table for those kinds of things. So our community relationships have to be killer. We have to preach the truth in order to edify and grow our people at the same time, and that those two things actually correlate.
Right.
That the people who are growing understand and realize the greater need for the community, and that those two things are marrying. I'm hitting this thing
that's
all
very
the
fine.
time.
Yep. Go ahead.
You go. I totally lost my thought when you interrupted me.
Sorry.
You're fine.
I was going back to this idea of faithfulness. So I am of the belief or the thought process. So what happened for me is, like, when we shut that whole thing down, we pretty quickly felt the Lord tell us. Now, the phrase that was given to my wife, and then I was like, of course, and then everybody around us was just like, yeah, that's exactly what needs to happen, was we ended up kind of relaunching, rebranding, kind of with the people that called themselves our friends and spiritual family. And so then we started The Source. But the phrase was, we need to get our people back together, and not our people as in, they're ours, but our community of faith. Like, who they are, know who's close,
right?
Who's grown with you, who's been around, who's friends, and you're hanging out not just at group and on Sunday mornings, right? So
yeah.
That was what we felt we needed to do. And so we moved forward in that and started The Source, but I did what I knew how to do, and I started a service with that. And so we ended up doing Sunday nights. But during that time, the Lord was really messing with me, and I was struggling with that idea of success as a church plant. I expected that we would relaunch and then it'd be like what we left, and it wasn't.
Yeah. Can we talk about expectations? Well, I want to say two things. Oh, well, you finish your thought. Your thought.
Hold on to expectations.
Yeah.
What I was getting at was, I realized, and what I believe now, is that the Lord, He's gifted us, right? Gifts of the Spirit, Romans 12 spiritual gifts, that kind of thing. That kind of thing.
That kind of
thing. Teaching, leading. I was getting ahead of myself. That kind of stuff. And so, anyways, I believe that God makes us a certain person, and He gifts us in a certain way, and that context never dictates that gift. The gift gets placed into a context. And so now,
that's good.
Your context is church planting. Praise God. You've planted this community church, this neighborhood church. You guys are growing. You're moving into a building. Like, things are happening. You're being faithful right now. But if you strip all that away, you're still Travis with the Spirit of God on you, called to go teach and lead and preach and care and disciple and love. And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you could strip away that exterior or the context, and you're still who you are.
Yeah.
And that's what He taught me. And I think that's a very important thing that I think maybe some church planners missed, and that I certainly missed, is that I thought that my worth and my value was found in my pastor Jason church planner situation.
Right. But that even extends into people who are not just church planners, but also just on staff at a church.
Anybody.
Like just anyone in ministry. There's this like holy, I don't know what to call it, like almost this holy chip that can come on our shoulders when we answer the call of ministry. Because here's why we've talked about this, because it's anytime you're dealing with like eternity and like where someone's gonna, it's the most important thing. Like it, and so it's easy to then like just put all your chips in on that. And I know, man, so many pastors, I myself at several points in being in ministry have gotten caught up in identity and, losing myself and becoming about what I'm doing for God and all of that stuff and letting that drift. And I think there's always this gravitational pull that's like pulling you towards that. And so you have to really try hard to stay focused and centered on like, okay, I'm not just this pastor or this next steps for, like, I have an identity and it's in Christ and it's not just this thing. So it's like you really have to focus hard, because I think, quite frankly, like there is a ministry monster and it will eat you up if you allow it. Like
the kukui, it's the ministry monster.
But there's always this pull, but you have to stay, and that's with anything, like you got to stay focused on Jesus, which sounds so silly to say as a pastor, but.
Well, and your best ministry will always happen not in a role, but in relationship. And you can't be in real relationship unless you are being yourself. And so that's the best ministry. If you are playing a role, you will play the job, and you can coast in that.
Oh, yeah.
But your best ministry, your most influence is relationship time. So like this building time, that like where we're kind of working on this building. And by the way, it's not like we're jumping into this building because we've outgrown Franklin where we're at. It's because we can keep running about the same, and we can make a building prettier, more useful to the families 24/7 than just being in one school. So it affects the whole neighborhood.
Well, it becomes a tool that you have access to all the time, rather than you can use this hammer on Sundays from 10 to 12.
But I think sometimes we would look and say, well, all the building work that we've been doing is about getting us to the final like day. But I have savored showing up at the building with a few guys and the relationships we've built.
Sure.
Right.
And planting, I have savored.
That's huge.
I've savored the setup time where these just having like conversation and building trust and actually going through a journey with people. That those are the kinds of times in planting that I think a lot of times we planters we miss,
or you take for granted, or you dread, like, I can't wait till we're not setting up these banners or this system or this all that stuff.
Right. And so savoring the opportunity for us to have those real relational times is so key, because ministry is relationship.
For sure.
We call it ministry just because that's what we're most comfortable with. But it's relationship.
Have you heard of Alan Hirsch? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Alan Hirsch, he actually talks about community, but he uses the word communitas, which is exactly what you're talking about. And he says it's that idea that people build relationship around accomplishing something together.
Right.
So like if you and we go to church on Sunday together and maybe we say hi in the foyer, that's cool. But if you call me over the weekend because you get a flat tire and I show up and I change your tire with you and then I get you home safely, we just shared an experience and accomplished something together. Yeah. That's exactly what you're talking about, is that relationship idea, right? Like you can fill the role, but I feel like the people that are with us today are the people that we truly built relationship with.
Yeah.
And there were people who just attended, and there are people who I still run into that I don't see all the time, but they still call me Pastor Jason. So in their minds, I'm still Pastor Jason from when I was their pastor, but I'm not necessarily somebody that I hang out with, they hang out with on the weekends. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah. I think when you can shift your viewpoint, I got to give the district church props, because I think that you guys have done a phenomenal job of, for anybody that may be listening, that's like, oh, good answer, Travis. Of course, like being faithful and, like, and like, are we really in the sit? Like, but no, I've sit back and watched you guys for, 2 years live this out, be in and for your part of town, your community. And it's the real deal. It's real stuff. And so I think that the success that you guys have had, air quotes, like the people that God has brought into your community and under, your pastorship, you leveraging those moments, the setup and tear down, the working in the building, all that stuff, instead of just accomplishing a task, realizing like, no, discipleship happens in the thousands of little moments that we have with one another. It can happen other ways too, but it can also be utilized when you're swinging a hammer or putting up insulation or doing all of these other things.
Well, let me say this about the success word too, on a kind of a different angle. When it comes to planting, here's just an observation, and I don't know if it's a Wichita thing or if it's a national thing, but I think we force planters to be so terrified of success because the plans that they come up with are not good plans. I think there are many planters who have bad plans. And sometimes what I've seen is they're forced into bad plans because they're forced into very small runways to do something incredibly hard. I always look at church planting as like, that is the hardest thing to do in ministry. I even have guys who are in business who are like, dude, I started my own company. Like I started 4 companies and they're all doing well. How do you start a church?
Right.
Like how do you get that thing going? Mm-hmm. It's so hard, but it seems like what we've done is we've taken the hardest thing to do and we've said, we'll give you 3 years to do it. Mm-hmm. We'll let you talk to a few people to help you do it.
Right.
And we want to see results immediately.
Yeah. And we'll give you this much money to do it, but you have to be self-sustaining after year 2.
Right. And so what I think that is that's not a kickback to the church to say, hey, church, you're really messing up. I think it's a kickback to the planters to say, go back and build relationships and get a church, get 2, get 3 that really back you and go into them and talk about, I'm in this for the long haul, but we need a long runway. We don't need 1, 2, or 3 year plans. We need 5, 6, and 7 year plans.
Right, yeah.
Because the failure rate for planting right now is year 5, 6, and 7.
Oh,
wow.
That's where we're seeing a lot of because these plants are getting up. Even there's some of them are seeing some success. They'll bob along, but that mode in the life of the church where they're close to that maybe that 200 number. Or it's fewer people, but they've got substantial giving.
Yeah.
When that church planting honeymoon season kind of wears off, the people that were with them from the start end up going back to existing churches because it feels more church-like to them. Instead of sticking with the mission. And so there has to be, I think, a partnership between the planter and existing churches to say, we are going to be a part of this. If the existing church is not a part of church planting in Wichita, then it's going to continue to be whatever you want to call it, a graveyard. It's going to be tough ground to tread.
Would you refer to Wichita as maybe taking on an identity of a graveyard for church planting? Maybe not but do you think it's a phrase that someone could use to accurately describe it? Maybe not an identity.
Yeah, but I think that it could be, but I think that in any city you go in, you're going to find a community of people that think that city is a graveyard for church planting because church planting is just hard. Now, I do think, so I had one of the guys on our management, Alex Gilpin. He was in Wichita for quite a while, but he's planted a church up on the north side of Kansas City. And he told me at Exponential one year, we're sitting in these pews, and he just said, man, because he knew that we were kind of getting the itch. Yeah. And he said, just FYI, Wichita's about 10 years behind Kansas City. Because Kansas City, like you go up there and there's church planters, they're all over the place. Right. A lot of great organizations, a lot of great churches are backing them.
A lot of community, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And so he said, but Wichita is 10, 15 years behind because Wichita hasn't bought into the research that suggests that church planting is the best way to reach people far from God.
Yeah, right.
And just across the board, we've not bought into that. Right now, Wichita has bought into other forms of, spiritual conversation and spiritual activity instead of, church planting is the thing we need, right? And
so
how
let
to
me ask
process
you,
that.
Let me ask you a question based on this then. So when you're saying church planting, tell me how that's different from just starting a service.
So we said this, one of the first things we said with our launch team. And again, we had a long runway. Like, I love church planting is so hard. Yeah. And we had as many tools as you could have to do it well, to do it right. Yeah. And that's from Riverlawn, right? That's from them saying.
So you had
that's from them resourcing us and giving us autonomy.
Yeah.
which is what I'm finding out is crazy.
I mean, they're
right?
basically giving you rep. Like, they're giving you their street cred. Like, we believe in them.
Absolutely.
Like,
Right.
we trust them. We support them. All of that.
But they also didn't like lord anything over us.
Yeah.
Like there was no, hey, I see you guys doing this on social media, and we don't want
Right.
that to represent us,
Right,
or
right.
Yeah.
you know, over here, like they just kind of
Yeah.
let us have that autonomy. That's huge, because I think if you've got a leader who's got a team and is resourced, and you say, I am encouraging you to go do this,
Right.
man, that sparks creativity, that sparks passion, that sparks security, which you need a little bit. Like planters are a little crazy. Like you got to
Right.
be you got to have some risk in
Right.
you to do it,
Right.
no matter what.
So-
but you got to have that backing.
So there are
So
plenty
many questions I wanna
there are
ask.
plenty of church services happening on Sunday mornings.
Oh, right. Let me say
Right.
this.
So
we
talk
said this
about
to our
that.
launch team.
Yeah.
Because we had 35 people coming from a church, and they went from a church service, really well done church service, and then
Sure.
they started meeting in a coffee shop on Sunday mornings. And we were not doing like church service.
Right.
We were like training and equipping for 6 months for ministry. And we told them all the time, just this one liner: we're planting a church, not a church service.
Good.
And as we're telling them that, that was like a good one-liner the first time they heard it, but it become a rallying cry 5 and 6 months down the road to remember the why here.
Yeah.
What's the difference between a church and a church service? And they began to understand, well, the church does the ministry, the church
Right.
does the equipping, the church is the people that are mentoring the kids, that are raising parents and families holistically. They're the ones that are sending and all those kinds of things.
Dude,
So that's a big
huge
deal.
because, I mean, you look at, I mean, it's almost where you guys shifted your focus. You're like, hey, this is an aspect of what we're doing, and it's going to come, and we're going to start a service, and that will be a thing that we do. But I mean, dude, and this is going to sound probably a lot more negative than I want it to sound, but I mean, I follow church planners. I'm friends with church planners, and I mean, even new church planners that follow me from Kansas City that are getting ready to kick off, and I got looped into their, ad thing, and I follow them just because I'm interested to see how they do things. And so much of the strategy is all geared towards pointing the finger towards the service, like this big thing is coming, and
Right.
and so, but what you're saying is that was going to be part of what you guys were doing, but it's like, hey, you almost in some ways pulled people back and took them out of this environment to where they could consume, and allowed them to like reshift their thinking, almost reconstruct their views of what the church is. Hey, the church isn't this service, it's we are gathering together. We're going to equip you. This is the thing to come. The goal isn't this service. The goal is
Right.
Being in our community and gathering, rallying the community. All that stuff.
So let's talk about real quick. I wanted to ask you this question, and I've asked Christopher this question before, and it's one of my favorite things to answer. Is what do you want for people? Look at how talented I am right now.
That's really good. I gave you that at a bad time.
I stayed on the mic and poured water. Yeah, ultimately, what do you want for people? So, like, bottom of the funnel, essentially, maybe I don't know. How did I want to frame it?
What's your goal? Like, what's your goal for people? Like,
right. Like, I mean, obviously, you would love for people to plug in and find community and know like, what is the ultimate thing that you want for people when they come to District Church or interact with anybody in your church family, your spiritual family?
Yeah, man, that's a question. As soon as I hear it, I'm like processing. I'm like, there's so many different answers, and so I'm overwhelmed by the answers. I'm like,
well, if
Say
you don't
them
know what
all.
to say, just say salvation.
Right.
That's the best answer.
Jesus.
I want them to
Because ultimately, this is what you're inviting them to.
Yeah, no, 100%.
Right.
I want them to see the church. I want them to see the church as a piece of the community that they're called to then go and help. And so the community at large that we live in, and the community that we're a part of as the church, I want those two things to be synonymous. Mm-hmm. And I want there to be. I always want people to. Like this will sound cliche and whatever, but I want people to have a relationship with Jesus in real life.
Right.
In real life, in real relationships, in real conversations.
Right.
Like I take 2 Corinthians 5:21, where we're like, we love the new creation piece, but that ambassador piece we get a little uncomfortable with. Mm-hmm. Like and we tell our church, like, the ambassador is a badge you don't ever take off. You follow Jesus in real life. So when you're in the coffee shop, when you get angry, when you get cut off, when you lose your job, when you get a job, like you're following him in real life. And so the question is always, how would Jesus live this out when he got a raise? How would Jesus live this out when he lost his job? How would Jesus live this out if he's broke? You know, I mean,
Right.
all those kinds of things. So like just follow Jesus in real life, because what I'm doing is trying to follow Jesus in the real life I have right now. And that's church planting in Delano, that's living in Delano, that's being always around the Midtown area. Is just like follow Jesus in real life. Follow Jesus with my wife when I go home, when I'm around my kids, when I'm here at this with you guys. It's just to follow Jesus in real life. And I think that's
you
the
want
key.
people to just live out their faith. I mean, essentially, like, hey, just don't come and just plug in and just do the checklist. Like, live this stuff out, like everywhere you go.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's key, and that'd be my desire, is that you'd walk into a group of people that are following Jesus in real life, and not the like ethereal following Jesus in my heart.
Right.
Like following Jesus, I think is a very you see it.
There's fruit.
You see it by people showing up to the service, and we don't over prioritize our service, but we do prioritize it. We see it by people serving, by people giving, by people sharing their faith, by people in close-knit community. That's a follower of Christ. If you're not doing those things, even though those are activities, you're probably not following Jesus at some level. There's probably a level of unbelief in your life where you're saying, it's just not for me right now. I'm not all in on that. And so so that's what I'd want people to walk into and then be a part of, that I could actually do this in my real life, follow him.
Right. And I think, and I'm going to say this, and I'm not saying that you weren't implying this, but I think it's worth saying that when you're saying follow Jesus, it's him leading. So I would say, you would say follow Jesus in loving your wife. And I would say, have Jesus lead you in the way you follow your life, right? Like it's saying the same thing,
right,
with just a different kind of, like, how is Jesus leading you to love your wife? How is Jesus leading you to have conversation at the coffee shop? Because I think that oftentimes we can get stuck in the task of, or in the thought process of, well, what would Jesus do? And we've said before, I think it's possible to mimic the actions of Jesus and actually miss his heart behind it. And so Jesus cultivating a heart for people within you, so that, it's not that, I don't think Jesus had to like force himself to be who he was. And I think sometimes we try and force ourselves to be who we think Jesus wants us to be,
right,
versus allowing that transformation to happen, or saying, yeah, do that in me. Because there's times where I don't want to be nice to my wife.
Yeah.
And so when that happens, I will do it, like fake it till you make it kind of thing. But I'm going in prayer and saying, God, that was ugly.
Yeah.
Like that is a nasty part of my heart. Why is that still there?
Well,
deal with that on a heart level.
We wrestle with belief in such a different way than they did when they walked with Jesus. Like
Right.
Peter used to disagree with Jesus, but still believe him. Right? Like seriously, like, so agreement and belief are two different things, right? So
Okay.
take so Luke 5, Jesus says, cast your nets out. Peter's washing his nets, and he
Right.
says, we've been working at this
Right,
all
right,
night.
right.
We haven't
Yep.
taken anything. He does not agree he's about to catch a boatload of fish, but he says, but because you say so, I'll do it.
Yeah.
So his thing was, first, you don't speak back to a rabbi like that. You don't say like we take obedience like this. Like we hear a sermon, we're like, let's go discuss it. And Jesus is like, no, you go do it.
Go do it.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
we're so weird on that. Let's talk about what it looks like instead of,
Yeah.
no, just go do it.
That's funny.
Like I can get rid of your small groups ministry
Well,
if you
how-
just do an obedience ministry.
It's like, he says, cast your net. And then he's just like, well, let's talk about the actual process of casting nets. And
Yeah,
why
yeah.
would
Jesus
we
is just
cast
like,
it? Yeah.
just cast
How
the
do you
freaking net, Peter.
Yeah, right. The Greek word for net.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he does it. And so he like doesn't agree that, because he's like, you're a carpenter. You make tables and chairs. Like, you can't tell me to go where I'm
Fish.
supposed to go
Stay
fish.
in your lane, Jesus.
Yeah.
Stay in your lane.
No, seriously. But he believes him because he does it. He actually obeys. And
Yeah.
he throws the net over and he pulls it back and he catches so much fish. They have to get another boat to come help. And then
Right.
Peter goes to his knees at Jesus's feet and just like doesn't even show his face, like, away from me, Lord, I'm a sinful man.
Yeah.
And so like we always think we have to transform and then obey, but for following Jesus in the Bible with discipleship, transformation happened as you obeyed.
Yeah,
So
sure.
and that's the thing we kind of lose, I think, sometimes in the church, where we say, you know what, you'll be transformed and then you'll obey. We should be telling people you can obey and you don't even believe or you don't agree, but you can do the things God has said, and there's going to be transformation that takes place in that activity.
It's like with kids. You say, clean your room, and then they do it begrudgingly, but they do it because you've yelled at them 15 times. But then the day that they clean the room when you haven't asked them, and then they come to you with joy and say, I cleaned my room, come look at it. You're like, what?
Yeah.
You know, and that's what we're talking about, right? It's like, you know.
I have a question. I've been sitting on it.
Sit on it. Take it away.
No, I don't want to sit on it. I want to take it out.
Well, that's
what I want us to discuss it. Okay, so let's talk about expectations. And we'll get a little vulnerable here, or maybe not vulnerable, just honest. I feel like we've been honest. Let's talk about expectations with church planting and like, you know, you're prepping, you're doing the launch team meetings, you're doing all this stuff. You know, there's confirmation in the call, and this is just speaking to any planter, you know, who's gone down the path. Like, you've done the right things, you've gone through the assessment, you've taken the advice, and now, you know, you're closing in on launch Sunday, and there's nothing but expectation, you know, of expecting the best thing. You know, like, how many people are we gonna have? Are we gonna have 100? How many chairs do we set up? Like, what do we do? And then going and launching, and then maybe it not being what you hoped for, or less than what you hoped for. I know that, you know, when we launched Living Water Church, you could look at our team and go, man, God stacked the deck here. Like, he's put some great leaders here. This is amazing. This is going to be so good. We have support. We have amazing men, pastor, church planners who are pouring into us and investing in us, advising us, guiding us, and it not doing what we thought it would do. I mean, and I'll just be super honest, we thought we'd at least have 100 people, like, at opening Sunday. Like, that didn't happen, and we didn't trend upwards the way that we wanted, or that we expected to, not even the way that we wanted to. And so, how, as a church planner, number one, I want to ask you, what kind of expectations did you have, if any, for when the district church launched? Like, and then how did those expectations contrast reality, or were they met, or were they the same thing?
So remember that part. So what were our expectations? Because because as you're talking, like, I love that part about church planting, even though it's one of the crappiest parts.
Yeah.
Because I never had to deal with expectations when I was in an existing church ministry. I shouldn't say never. It's an absolute, you know. Not often did I have to deal with expectations. I never once, working for an existing church, stood out in the parking lot and was like, man, I hope someone shows up. Yeah. Never had that.
Right. I've done that.
Always, you know. But,
no, I mean, I have too, yeah.
But as a church planter, you know, we had our launch Sunday, and that's so terrifying.
It's scary.
Because you have this, you've been building for this launch day, and you're like, man, just hoping like people will come through the door, and people show up, and it's like, okay, expectations met. I can go in and preach, or I can go in and do what I need to do that morning.
Yeah.
But then the next Sunday, which this is like national research is like, whatever you have on launch day, you're going to have half that the second week.
Yeah.
Which is literally what that's literally what happened to us.
That's a pretty fair statistic.
Us.
That's because you're sexy.
Not when we started up north.
Everyone wanted you to be their baby daddy.
You're
a single guy
That's
launching
true.
a church.
I was a single pastor back then. That might have had to do with some of the female.
There you go.
His congregation was 90% single moms. I don't know what it was.
But what I was going to say, broken expectations is a perfect place to forge great character. Because
I agree 100%.
And too often we look at expectations and we just sit in it and we process it. And this is like what you were saying before, Jason, about like expectations ends up hurting us at a deep level because we've put our identity in being a successful church planter.
Right.
And so why are expectations broken? Because that part of us that we've put out didn't get the affirmation it was looking for.
Right.
But Travis wasn't broken.
Yeah.
No one was saying, "Hey, we don't want to come because we don't like you, Travis."
Right.
But I put that in my head, and so some of our expectations come from our inability to put our identity in the right place.
Right.
Oh, I agree 100%.
And wrestle with it that way. So but man, God really like expectations is just something that he's just worked out in me and said like, deal
I'll
with
take a
this
double
with me.
dose of that, please.
No, it just and those are just moments. I think just a little prayers like, God, I don't know what to expect today. I just don't know what to expect. But whoever comes to the door, thank you, because you're bringing them in.
Right.
And no matter what it is, and don't let my eyes get focused on, every planter has the Monday blues, where you're dealing with some of the rough, like, okay, you always think about attendance. You're always looking at some sort of line item.
Margaret
of money.
didn't show up again in the nursery.
Right.
You have to have a conversation.
You know what used to drive me the craziest? I don't know how you feel about this. Is on Sunday morning, early in the morning, getting all the text messages from the people who can't be there that day.
Yeah.
They just, hey, I can't do this.
I would rather they just didn't show
I
up
would
than
just
just
rather-
to text me. Instead of, yeah.
And they were doing it out of they wanted, oh, I can't make it. I'm so sorry. They were
Yeah.
genuinely sorry, but it was like one after the other. And I'm like, oh,
And
it's
that's
driving me crazy.
That's true of existing churches. They have the same exact thing.
Yeah.
Even the most successful churches in Wichita right now, I guarantee you, their children's staff, their volunteer staff for Sunday mornings has the same thing happen every week, where they're dealing with volunteers who last minute don't show up.
Yeah.
Never told them. It's just plants feel it more because we don't have backup,
Right.
and backup and
Right.
backup
We don't
and
have a
backup.
bench.
You're the tech
Yeah.
dude,
Yeah,
man.
yeah.
No one
Everybody's
knows
in.
how to run that soundboard
Yeah.
but you.
It's true, bro.
Yeah.
So you feel it. You feel it a
Yeah,
whole
you
lot
do.
more. So we had the same expectations probably that any planter would have. We expected. I think when we started, I was expecting like 300 people. We had 175, I think.
Yeah.
And
On launch Sunday?
On launch Sunday.
175.
175
That's
on
great.
launch
That's a big
Sunday.
deal. Yeah.
But I was expecting
But
more than
and then
that.
did you guys drop to 85? the next?
Literally, it was like 86. I
Really?
think was our following
Yeah.
Sunday, which
Wow.
first of all, like, it's crazy because there's this weird tension in planting where it's like only 86, 86,
Bro, 86.
Right.
and then
86.
and
Dude,
then we just
that's
kind of
so
incrementally
good
grown from
that you could have that mindset because, and granted, I'm probably speaking from a place of like we're speaking from experience, but the paradigm that we were in, what happened? There was almost this pressure to perform. So there were expectations, and there was this. What did you do? What didn't you do right? Did you not have a strong enough social media presence this week? Did you this? Did you that? And so that type of those mental gymnastics that you have to go through to like almost, it's almost like you can't help but rate yourself up with God. Like, oh man, if the authority in my life is feeling this way, is God feeling this way? Is this? And so it's extremely vulnerable for church planners. You spend all this hype. It's all you post about. Your friends are blocking you like you're a third multi-level marketer. It's like all you talk about. You have the thing. You're posting all the pictures,
Right.
and then everyone's waiting to see a crowd shot opening Sunday. Like,
Yeah.
how many people were there? How many people were there? And you're like, we only had 85. And you're over
You're
here
like,
like,
what the heck?
we had 85. Like,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Like, and so the question that I want to get to and that I want to ask planters, because let's just be honest. I mean, well, maybe not. Maybe you're a rare breed, but I feel like the majority of planters feel like if God is bringing me to it, He's going to bring me through it. He's going to blow the doors down. We got the sky's the limit, and He's going to do something huge and something big. But if He brings 100 or 50 or 75, then that's exactly what God wanted.
But isn't that bad theology?
Yeah,
I mean, isn't
I
it-
would say yes.
No, I'm and I don't mean that's your theology. That's why
right.
he brought the book.
Yeah,
That's
I
why
know.
Jason brought the book out.
It's in here. It's chapter 5.
No, but that's the same.
You did read it.
Like on some level, that's like the reward theology, that your obedience
Right.
means a reward's coming. And reward is something that Jesus talks about in the future, that reward comes, nothing goes unnoticed and ungiven, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, we have more examples in the Bible of a successful prophet going out and just being crushed than we
Yeah, no
have
joke, of them winning.
of the
Right.
picture of what you just said.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, I followed. Where's the crowd?
Jeremiah. Yeah, like
Eat that poop, Jeremiah.
it was Ezekiel.
Oh, it's whatever. They all ate their poop.
Jeremiah
I mean,
just
essentially.
wept over the people not turning.
But then that always like leads me back to that faithful word of like, what is it that we're called to be faithful to? Because if I'm called to be faithful to bring a big crowd, and that big crowd doesn't happen, then God's going to talk to me about why weren't you faithful to bring in that crowd, and I'll be like, man, God, I still know I didn't know how to make that happen,
Right.
and I don't think that's on His checklist for us.
I would say not.
I think that if the crowd comes though, then it's the same thing that's on His checklist. Were you faithful to my word? If Paul was sitting in the audience, would he get up and say, that's exactly what I meant?
Right.
Right. Those kinds of things are
Right,
what
right.
we're called to be faithful to, but we put certain things on ourselves that God didn't put on us.
You know, that's absolutely correct. I had a lot of works-based religion on me when I moved here to help start this location that we started in 2011. And it was me like, I'm going to do this for God. Like I'm finally answering the call. I'm finally going to be the man that God wants me to be. I'm finally obeying. I'm finally leaving behind my past. Right. And so I moved into this thing, and I remember I kept saying, I'm so excited about what God's going to use me for. Oh, use me, God, use me, like what He's going to do through me, and this, that, and the other, and whatever. And somebody one time they said, you know what, Jason, God's going to use you to do things, but He's also going to do things in you. And they said, as a matter of fact, I think He's more concerned about the change that's going to happen in your life than the change that you're going to help happen in other people's lives, right? So the fruit of the ministry is going to be there, but what He's going to do in you is going to be far more superior. And I will absolutely say that He used this entire journey to do something in me, and I wouldn't be here who I am in Him and trust Him and love Him and know Him on a deeper level. I don't think had I not gone through that, but He's so sovereign, He's so powerful that He uses a works mentality, like jacked up, with relationship with God kind of like He can use that still. He's like, I'm going to use you. I'm going to throw you down. Right. And you are going to teach and preach and speak truth and introduce people to Jesus and all that stuff. But I'm also going to change all that crap that's going on in you at the same time.
Yeah.
And so I've come out of that entire experience, right? It's that crushing, or what'd you say? You made like a tweetable statement about the broken expectations being a great place to build character.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's what the Lord was doing in me. He was taking me through all this stuff. But really the work that was happening in me, I believe, was more profound than anything.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And sometimes I think that's the process of idols being revealed. Hardly ever do I give up an idol. I think idols are always revealed in my life. And so when that crowd doesn't come, and the expectation's just down, what's being uncovered is that I had an idol, right? Yeah. So
that's good, man.
I wouldn't have ever laid, I want a big crowd on the altar, because I would think that's what God wants me to do.
Yeah. Right.
But instead of like it really being for God, it was more for me. And so then when it doesn't come, I'm like, oh man, that was in the wrong place. It's not that was a bad thing, but I made it the ultimate thing. Like Kierkegaard says,
100%.
Sin is not the doing of bad things; it's the making of good things into ultimate things, right? And that is true for me. Good. I can take any the creation that God made, and I made it it's Romans 1, right? I made it the created, exactly. Yeah. And so I think that has to do with like our expectations and God wanting to root out and again, he's driving home holiness. He wants to see us be holy. And that's a punishing blow for the lay member in your church and the things they're going through, and it's a punishing blow for the pastor who's faithfully following and serving, but there can be a greater weight to that in what we experience and feel.
Yeah, man, I agree with all that. There's a lot of wisdom you two dishing out, serving up right there. The question that I keep thinking, or that I want to ask planters, I mean, especially that come into our city, and people that step into our circle, and not out of a place of like judgment, literally at a place of like caring, like, hey, do you have expectations? And if they're not met, how are you going to react to that? If you do all of these things, and at year 2, you guys have only 175 people launched with, we'll go 250, and then you drop back down, and you guys have got back up to. Is that going to be seen as a failure? If because I feel like for you guys, one of the things that you had said yesterday at our lunch was that you guys have had just this incremental. It hasn't been this explosive. It's been this incremental kind of faithful, like, if you will, like God's maybe even saying, like, okay, you're caring for my sheep, I'm going to introduce a few new families into your flock, that type of deal. So not this explosive growth, but this faithful, incremental, sustainable is a word that you used, gathering of people to come into your community. So the question that I want to ask, planters is are you okay with leaving your ego at the door, your expectations at the door, and being okay with whatever God does? Because I've seen staffs, volunteer leads, pastors' wives be crushed under the expectations of the head person because they're not being met, and they have their agenda and their holy wars, if you will, that they're fighting out there, leaving a wake of bodies and people in broken faith behind. And it's sad when that happens, but it's way more common than we would hope that it would be.
But you're 100% right. But I think what's difficult in that, you can't have a church planter leave their ego or expectations at the door because they haven't had them yet. They haven't had them met or dropped.
Right. So it's almost like they have to have that first experience up there.
And I think you got to. If you knew what church planting was, I don't think many people would ever do it. Like if you actually knew the emotional toll, the spiritual toll, the physical toll, if you knew the kind of conversations you were going to have with your wife on nights that, like, you just want to, you want to be home with the family, but there's something, it's like you're having these real conversations that are just, man, they're heart-wrenching.
Man, dude, do you remember how we talked about, like, oftentimes before, and I don't know, I think we've had conversations like this, me and you, towards, like, man, I just got in a big fight with my wife, with Lara, and I'm heading off to lead this volunteer meeting. But, we got into a fight because I've only been home twice this week, and we haven't had dinner together. And so there's, like, all of these things that
But I have to go do this thing.
And that's just a part of the machine, It's just things got to get done. It's tough. It's strenuous on a marriage.
Well, and I think planters think that their passion will take them far, but I think God always values patience over passion.
Perseverance, yeah.
I think he's like a God who says, man, I want you to be patient. Your passion is great, but Jesus wasn't a huge fan of zealousness. He didn't champion people who were just zealous for his name.
Well, if Casey were here, Casey's our co-host who hasn't been with us for a while, but he would say it's like fire, right? Fire in a fire pit, and contained, it's powerful, it's beautiful, it accomplishes something. But fire without containment or confinement is detrimental.
It's dangerous.
Yeah,
it's
that's
dangerous,
good. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so he says, it's okay to have zeal, it's okay to have passion, but it's got to be contained, right?
Yeah.
And there's a place for it.
Yeah.
Start the fire there. Burn there, right?
Yep.
You take that away and it can get crazy.
For sure.
Yep. Absolutely.
I wanted to ask a question. So, I don't know that I want to go that route. Nope, I'm going to defer. I'm not going to ask that question.
I want to know what the question was.
Nope.
Okay.
So, I'm not going to ask that question, but I did want to ask you the question, and I told you I was going to ask you this beforehand. So we're talking about expectations. We're talking about not feeling the success, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so we've seen quite a few church plants shut down in Wichita for different reasons. Under what circumstance do you think you would ever shut the doors of District Church? And you can actually choose to not answer this question, but I feel like a lot of guys don't know the answer to that question when they plant, because they don't, in their minds, think that it boils down to expectation. God called me to this. We're going to have to grow. I don't think he called me to plant just to shut it down in three years. Nobody would say that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And
absolutely. 100%.
Yeah. So either answer how or why you would shut it down, or why maybe you think church plants are closing.
So I would use the same formula for how I was called in.
Okay.
I would listen for the voice of
consistent.
I would listen for the voice of God, and I would look for affirmation of people around me and close leaders that I would respect, and I would hope that I would listen to them. And if they said, "Hey, it's just not working right now. We can be doing this somewhere else. We can be taking the people that you have. We can use them in better ways. We can reach that area in a better way." then close the doors at that level, and which helps me because it takes the weight off my back. This isn't my thing, right? And I think this is the other thing that planters have to get with, like. This is not Travis's church. It's not Brady's church. This is God's church. God never gave you a church to plant. He gave you a church to serve and go and steward and be faithful in. And so I don't own any real estate of it.
Right.
So how would you respond? Because I had to ask these questions at every level of our existence. And sadly, when we were the biggest, it still wasn't enough. But as we've continued to lose numbers, we've continued to grow deeper in relationship with those around us, and we've continued to grow closer to Christ. And I believe we've been faithful, and we've started new ministries, the podcast, like there's multiple podcasts, there's online presence and classes and that kind of thing that have been birthed out of what we're doing.
Right.
So it's not really a come into our room and be a part of this thing that we're trying to grow, but really equipping people to do the ministry that God's called them to do. So that has continued to happen. But I've had to wrestle every step of the way. And honestly, there was one Friday night where I think we had 3 people show up. And, I went home and I was like, God, what do we do? Do we shut this down? Based on the amount of people that have shown up. So do you ever feel like if you were, and we're sustainable, like that's the craziest thing.
Right.
Like we can pay our bills. And our motto is pay our bills and give the rest away. And so we actually pay our bills. We support different ministries, and we're able to be benevolent, generous with the money that we have.
That's awesome.
And we're not like this huge numbers ministry or church. And so, at what point do you start asking the question like, well, God, do we need to shut this down? It's like, is it 40? Is it 70? Is it 35? You know what I mean?
I know you asked him, but can I?
Sure.
Can I chime in?
Yeah, go for it.
I mean, I think for a lot of church plants, I think people start asking that question when you come down to when you can't pay the bills or when things are, getting kind of, and I don't mean that, and that's just a reality when it's like, man, we can't pay for rent. We got this, all of these, mostly rent, and oftentimes in schools, if a lot of planters go into schools, you're talking a couple grand, like per Sunday.
And especially if salary, like,
Yeah, sometimes, I mean, there's all of those factors, but I think there's a lot of planters that would not take a paycheck to keep it going, but when you can't pay the rent, that's literally, I think, the kind of the big thing that's like, I don't know if we can do this. And so I think for a lot of people, they're analyzing based off of finances and can we sustain this? Can we do this? Just with Living Water, when we launched, that wasn't, that was a question that we started having. I mean, we started looking financially at like, we can't afford this. This isn't working, and we knew it's like, okay, we're good till this period. If at this point things aren't working out, we're going to have some very serious conversations. Now, we were about 3 months before that point when we felt like God said it's time to make a switch and transition, and that's when paradigm shift. Now I know there's some people that have said like, dude, you just made that shift because you couldn't afford it. I see what you did, and it's like, we may have looked at that once we got to that row, but we didn't have to answer that question and look at that.
It's like Francis Chan stepping out and going to start house churches. Like, you couldn't afford to sustain the thing.
Right, except Chan could.
That wasn't a situation.
Yeah, but so for us, we started looking at that, and I know that there are lots of planners that financially that's a tough thing, or when you can't find space, or when there's just no space to be had, like, and it's real hard. I mean, for us, like, we needed a park right now. I don't know what's going to happen in 3 months when it starts getting cold. Like, we have a couple contingency plans for some things, but which is fine because we're in a very interesting season in our church plant too right now, to where I honestly don't know how much is coming in, but I don't necessarily need to know because we have like zero expenses. We're able to meet some needs when we can, but maybe that's considered reckless or sloppy or I don't know. But
sure.
I think for a lot of people it's the financial, and I don't mean that as a bad thing as much as I do the reality.
Yeah.
One of the questions I was going to ask you is how did you end up planting the model or paradigm that you planted? Because it makes me wonder too, like, you guys started, Living Water started, and they like planted the service and like did that whole thing and went that route. But now God has led them to, meet in homes and that's what they're doing. It's a smaller community, whatever you want to call it. But I believe Chris is being as faithful as he knows how to be. And so, what I guess I want to know, what is it that drives people to want to like plant in the school and do the big service and do that kind of thing, rather than actually like, hey, let's start some house churches or, that kind of thing.
Yeah, for me, that's probably just more opinion, because
Sure.
I got friends that are like, all around that they've got different paradigms that they're kind of working through, house
Right.
church model, things like
Yeah,
that. And I mean, I
yeah. respect
respect the heck out of what they do. For me, I think some of it's gifting and ability. I connect really well with people from the stage, and I've just recognized that not as something I'm super insecure about it. Like I'm always asking my wife the wrong questions after a sermon. Hey, how'd I do? Do people like me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but I think that especially in a service, the spiritual gift of just preaching the Bible,
True.
people connect with. I think it's still something that even in today, just old school preaching the Bible connects with the person that's even furthest from God. We like every week I have an atheist, agnostic, I have a gay, we have trans. We got a lot of stuff
Did you
going
say that
on.
you guys have like some people that work nearby, like some people of the Muslim faith that come over and like attend some of y'all's Bible studies sometimes?
We've just got a conglomerate, like just different people. But what I think that they are fixated on is when we just get up and preach the word.
It's your
and
tight
we
jeans,
talk-
bro.
Right. But so for us, that fits just a natural personality characteristic, a natural gifting. It's not something we're faking. It's something that we love to do, but we don't like crush the service. It's not like the thing.
Right.
We're not like looking to compete and say, man, we're just going to compete with every service in town. We just understand that I think that preaching, real biblical preaching, and using that gifting, especially when it's something I think that God's gifted you in, I think that connects with people in really supernatural spiritual ways.
So do you think that maybe, and this is all speculation and opinion now, and I'm not thinking of anybody in general, but
Perfect. I like it.
okay, good. Like, Joe Schmo goes to plant a church and he's like, yeah, we're going to do this thing. Like maybe had he gone a different route or tried a different model, he'd have been more successful, quote unquote, in that, even though we just talked about faithfulness. So you can be faithful in, doing
Right.
anything, but
Yeah.
some guys may be better fit for that kind of situation. Like, and you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
Like you said, you planted with Stadia. So they did your assessment
Yep.
and got behind you through funding and all that stuff and mentorship.
Yeah, so they
Yeah.
really didn't like fund us. They equipped us with training,
Okay,
bookkeeping,
right, right.
that kind of thing.
So they planted a specific model then, I'm sure.
They've got a model in their minds.
In their minds, right.
Yeah.
So maybe, I guess my question is then, like, if I show up and they're assessing me for their model, do you feel like they're in the mindset of like, hey, I don't think you would be great at starting a Delano neighborhood church, but I think you'd be a killer house church leader. Like,
Well, see, I think it's got to be, because I think you're on the right track.
Yeah.
I think it's less the model of the church and what is the need around you, which is what we're trying to answer in Delano.
Okay.
So like and I actually think big churches are doing this really well. They know who they're trying to reach, and
Right.
they are unapologetically reaching them. And so in the burbs, you've got
The burbs.
You've got they've got like 35-year-old Rick on their wall that they're trying to reach him.
They're
And
buyer
so-
persona.
Rick and Janine.
Right. But what they've created, what they've done well, I think, is they've created a model for how to do church for him and his wife and his
Right.
2 kids and a
Yeah.
dog. And so if you went to Stadia and you were like, man, there's this neighborhood or there's this section of our town, like that's where we're going to see the unchurched, is more in subgroups of people that already exist in our culture. And if we get creative on where the lost are, where the people are that are far from God,
Right.
and we create our churches to fit that need, then the model of the church is going to fit that.
Right.
Not the model of the church is going to fit, this neighbor. Does that make sense?
Right.
Right.
And so what I want to say to that is I think that we need to like destigmatize or make it okay and even a healthy practice to allow people to graduate out of models.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about 35-year-old Rick. Well, if he goes to theburbchurch.com for 4 years and they're still doing church for 35-year-old Rick, and he's 39-year-old Rick, 4 years grown in the faith,
Right.
that might not be for him anymore.
Right.
And so then
100%.
how do we maybe get people, churches, pastors, whatever, to think like, hey, it's okay if you graduate out of our model?
Yeah, well, see, and this is where I think churches have to get out of the mindset of like, and the individuals have to too, but the comparison thing.
Right.
God made an elephant to be an elephant. It's massive. It's huge.
Yeah.
It needs
Yeah.
different. I mean, so it's got different needs. An otter is small, right?
Yeah.
Like but it's designed that way.
Right.
It's supposed to be that way.
Yeah.
And so every church looks at success and failure based on how many are in the seats and what money's coming in, instead of what's success or
budgets, and
failure
baptisms.
based on where you're at and the lost that
right.
are around you and the people that need to hear what's the gospel need around you, because those should be more of the defining factors of how well you're doing. And you should seek sustainability in your context, not at church plant like at large. It should be, what does a sustainable church look like? If I want to plant a church that's going to be here for 25 years or 50 years, what does that model look like here that's going to keep reaching people for that amount of time? And if it's not fruitful first, like I think evangelism drives the church. Discipleship is huge right now, but discipleship always happens naturally as the church becomes more inward focused. But evangelism is what really gets the church. It's like evangelism is the New Testament buzzword. Like that's what gets people excited about what's going on where you're at, is Jesus is new. Something's new happening in me. Transformation is taking place. I'm not completely sure about everything that's going on here, but I like where they're headed. You know, those kinds of things.
Yeah, but you know what? Like I came to know the Lord, I think when I was like 14 years old, but I grew up in church. But it was when I was 14, a freshman in high school, that I really came into relationship with him. But even so, that was I was 14. I'm 37. So 23 years, even 23 years later, I'm excited about the transformation that's happening in my life because of my relationship with Jesus. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that, you know, if we can get that, you know, that's still evangelism to me at 23 years into my walk, still talking about how amazing Jesus is.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
you have to know this guy.
Can I go?
Yeah.
Can I go on one for a second?
Get on it.
Okay. So, you know, use the word evangelism, and I think that's so important. I mean, it's now how people do that and what that looks like, and, you know, does that take place during there's just all these questions that go along with that. But I mean, people can agree with that's like making the connecting point from you to someone else to introducing them to Jesus.
Right.
Now, regardless of how that happens, there's all sorts of different methods and things like that. I feel though, like for so many people and so many people in a church community, they've been told that it's almost like they're not evangelizing Jesus or spreading the good news of the gospel or Jesus or, you know, who he is, but how awesome our church is and how awesome our service is and all of this thing. And so there's this huge, maybe you call it an idol around like this brand of our church and who it is. And so, you know, based off of some of the things that you've shared with me and just that you've said on the podcast, I don't think people are coming to the district church because, your words, I'm not knocking it, like,
Right.
you guys aren't like
Crushing
crushing the service and like, you know, doing this big thing to people. Are like, dude, did you see that Carrie Job this week? Like, you know, like you guys aren't like doing that, or you have other really big mega churches where they're known for a certain element of their church. I would say that with the district church, what I've heard from you and seen from other people and from the impact that you've had in the community is that people are coming to the district church because of the people of the district church, the interactions that they're having with them, you know, the teachers at the school, some of the parents of those kids. And so what's happening is that people are being mobilized out into the community.
Right,
it's not so much whereas the service is just this hub that people come back to. That's the gathering so it's the anthill that people return to every single week.
Right.
But it doesn't sound like you guys are pushing for get them here, you know, blah, blah, blah. Like, that's not the main point. Whereas I see so many people, and I was once there. I mean, to where it's like, our church is awesome. We have this, like
Right.
sign this membership and you get a little tag to scan on your way. Like the whole thing, like you're a part of our community now. Sign this covenant.
Well, I mean, evangelism is it's an individual thing. And I would say nothing pushes people to grow faster than evangelism. They can pray, they can give, they can serve, but everybody's uncomfortable with it because it's the thing that makes you grow the fastest. Go share your faith with that person. They get all nervous, and then they start to actually vocalize what's coming out. Jesus says, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. So when you start speaking and you bumble over your words and you look like a fool in front of that person, you go back to Google and say, man, well, I didn't understand that question. And you deepen your faith through that whole process. Right?
Yeah.
But what you're saying, I totally agree with, because the evangelism worldwide is the church. Right? Mm-hmm. Like the great evangelist is not an individual person. It is the church body. It's community. Right? And so that was the whole goal. Like Jesus says, like they'll know that you're mine by how you love one another, by how you're united. And so the entire church has to be a part of that evangelism picture collectively.
Yeah. Well, you even take the word, since we're talking about evangelism, and I think that people are scared, I think, to evangelize. Maybe not. There is a big part of it is because they don't feel like they have all the answers. But there's another part too that I think that we've almost put expectations on people that you've evangelized successfully if they pray the prayer. Like you did the great job.
Right.
And so it's almost like,
Right.
I'm going to use the analogy. It's like trying to go out on the first date and get lucky. It's like you're just trying to close the deal. I mean, that's what it is, as opposed to like, no, I'm going to start this relationship. We're going to start out. I'm going to get to know you. You're going to get to know me. And then you do whatever Jesus says. Maybe Jesus tells you to share this aspect of your faith. Maybe he doesn't. I mean, but following his lead and prompting throughout that process instead of just like, did you get the hand? Did you get the prayer? Like that thing. And so that could be overwhelming and like defeating for people.
Yeah. I would just say that when people in our culture see a changed life, like someone, we talked we had one of our huddle questions this last week was like, how rare is it to see a real Jesus follower? Like, how many Jesus followers do you know in your life? Like, that you would actually index in your life and, like, in your mind and say, man, that is a Jesus follower.
They go,
and
Pastor Travis, Pastor Brady, that's it.
But no,
those
but like...
salty dogs.
Those salty dogs over there. But unfortunately, most of our people were answering with, it's very rare. Mm-hmm. I don't know of many that I would say, that is a Jesus follower, identify that way. And so when you do see somebody who is vocal in a relationship, I'm never one, like, it's just not my personality. Just be like,
if you were to die in the next 30 seconds.
Yeah. But when I go, like, so I go to the gym and I view that as like a mission field.
Yeah, for sure.
Every single day I'm looking to like these guys don't know it yet, but like, if I haven't met them, if I haven't met them yet, there's a goal for me to meet them.
No, man, I understand.
And to go in that direction, and build that relationship. And I've seen fruit from that. There's been people that come now to the church that I see on a daily basis because I started that process with them. And that's what I just want to exemplify for our church. I want them to have that somewhere and have that time out and about where they're actually building that.
And I think it's important because, I asked that question earlier, like, what do you ultimately want for people? Well, my answer is the Sunday school answer, Jesus. Like, I just want people to come to know him. Like, I want them to get plugged into community. I would love for them to have ministry and, live out what God has put in their heart, like all that stuff. But ultimately, like, if people enter into relationship with the invisible God, right? Like, he reveals himself to them and then, Holy Spirit, transformation, regeneration, that introduction, that relationship that starts to happen. Like, he's got them. Yeah. Like, I don't have to worry. I mean, I can help them in their life, and maybe I'm a shepherd to them or teacher or pastor, whatever it is. Yeah. But for the most part, it's like, if you enter a relationship with God and you're going home and you're crying out, in the middle of the night or before you go to sleep, you've got that secret place where you're connecting with him and he's doing something, like, praise the Lord. Yeah. Like, I want that more than anything for anybody.
Sure.
But I think people have to know their why. Travis, mm-hmm. Like, we talk about evangelism and like, go share your faith. It's a scary thing. Well, sometimes people don't know why they should.
Yeah.
Or we can tell them why, but if they don't know why and if they don't have a why, they're not going to do it. Yeah. Right? It's out of the overflow.
Yeah.
It's not like, it's the pastor's job to pop the top. You know, like we can help maybe shake them up a little bit.
But I think there's something in that. So let me push back.
Go for it.
Okay. I think our generation, how old are you, Jason?
37.
Okay. So our generation, how old are you?
28.
28. Get out of here.
How old are you?
33.
Oh, okay.
I'm 28.
Yeah. You're just
Just
too
ignore
young.
the hairline.
Well, we just got a nice little...
But even, I mean, collectively in our generation, we're super uncomfortable with evangelism.
Right.
Because we think evangelism is intrusive. Mm-hmm. We think it's rude. We think that is what is one thing that's actually wrong with the church, is because there's this expectation. We think evangelism, and if you're like me, I think track. Like passing a track to somebody. And I just have horror things in my...
the bracelet we made in VBS.
Right. Yeah. And so we're uncomfortable with certain elements.
You're a sinner.
Yeah. We're uncomfortable with certain elements of like public faith.
Yes.
But this goes back to that obedience factor where Jesus is like, he doesn't like preach and then say, go discuss it. He's like, preach and go do it. I think he's the same with evangelism. He sends the 72 out 2 by 2, right? I don't think that they could look back and say, not ready for that. Because I guarantee out of that 72, they weren't all like, yeah, let's go and do it. I think there was some like me who'd be like, I'm kind of uncomfortable with this.
I'm going to do it, but you told me, Jesus, but...
Because there's a little bit of uneasiness. No matter how well you're trained and no matter how long you take and no matter how much of a relationship you build, we're called to just go.
Right. And I think if people can get over that weird hump and actually get comfortable or... even get passionate about their faith.
Yeah.
But again, that it flows from the why. You know, why should I follow Jesus? Man, let me tell you, when I was 14 and my life's never been the same, and I had some ups and downs, but man, I'm at peace and whatever.
Yeah.
Like he's awesome.
Yeah.
That's going to flow from that place of having actually experienced him.
But what's a better why? Because you're convinced or because Jesus told you to?
Because you're convinced.
Okay. But Jesus told you to.
He did.
Right? So and that goes back to that story with Peter. He wasn't convinced.
Right.
But he did. Why? Because he literally said in that line, because you said so.
Right.
That's the cultural element that's different for us from like a biblical practice than how we practice. And I think that we have to be sensitive to that.
And I think that authenticity has a lot to do with it too.
Yeah,
because
that's what I was going to get to.
I can just robot, if you were to die in the next 30 seconds, do you know where you would spend eternity?
We use that joke, but there's probably not very many people out there that are
I'm with you.
Throwing that out. I think for me,
that's where that comes from.
Yep, I'm with you.
I think with evangelism, for me, one of the things that brings hesitation or pause for me is the bait and switch, right? Like I'm all for, like, if I could reorient or say one thing to believers, is to not just don't view someone as a wham bam, like, did you accept or yes or no? No? Okay, I'm on to the next one.
100%.
Because that's not right. And I think that's where my big issue right now with, people who are evangelists. They have the heart, not evangelists. There are people that have that passion, but we're all called to do the action.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so, but for people that are like, I got to go out today, I got at least 10 people, and dude, I don't want to talk to you anymore. Like, I don't have time for you anymore. But for you, or for an approach that is a lot more, I guess, holistic or all life missional may be the right word too.
Yeah.
It's, hey, even if they want nothing to do with your faith and those aspects of your faith, you can still continue to evangelize by your love, the love you have for them, staying in their lives, all of that stuff. And so for me, I guess, yes, there's a point where you come and you share your faith whenever Jesus tells you to, but I don't think Jesus is going to go, well done, on to the next one, with the hand clap. You stay present, you be there in their life, and you don't just run away because you didn't get 100%. The yes.
Yeah.
Sure. And I think it boils down to calling. And again, how are we wired? Like KP Yonahan, is that his name?
Yeah.
So he talks about getting saved and then preaching in the square.
Yeah.
Right? Open air preaching.
Yeah.
And so that is his thing. Some people will be like, I 100% believe in relational evangelism. I want to look the person in the eye. I want to know them. I don't want to just, blanket onto a crowd, people I don't know. And if they don't accept, well, too bad. And, if they do, great, come with me kind of situation.
Yeah.
And so, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, to relate this to church planting, why this has changed for me, because I worked with someone who was very much put the track out, just share, made me feel super uncomfortable.
Sure.
I was discipleship heavy. Church planting, The evangelism piece is the part where I had to just come to terms with some things in my walk with the Lord. And so you just go over, like, for me, I'm most comfortable with like what Paul would do, like go into the synagogues and reason with them day after day, and just reason but keep going back and build that relationship, you know. But because I find that it's easier for me to evangelize when I get up front and honest with who I am the first day, and then I keep coming back 60, 70, 80 days afterwards. Because they know who I am, and they're ready. Then they're ready to start having that conversation. I don't have to hold anything back on who I am.
So can I ask you what you say? Like, because do you? I mean, and I'm not trying to be. Do you just say, hey, my name's Travis. I'm started a church here in the Delano district.
No, I do. I believe strongly in like come and see.
Yeah.
So come and see the church. Come and see what we do. Because they get to then come and actually hear me preach. It's like, I'm inviting them, or come hear my brother, or something like that.
They're stepping into that. They're stepping across that like line.
So I'll do that.
Come to District Church and hear Brady. He'll give you the gospel.
Or I'll find out where they live.
Yeah, that works too.
Plenty of people, and I'm like, okay, hey, there's a church over here. There's church, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do the come and see method. There's going to be times though where, and this is where I just try to like, man, I don't know. I'll start a conversation with someone, and it is very easy to get deep real quick.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, people are vulnerable today.
Right.
They really value the authenticity, and I think there's nothing more real than Jesus. And so I can get into those conversations by relating it to, oh man, like here's where I'm at with that, and here's what I do. And then, but what I'm always looking for is what's the second point of contact with a person that I can begin to get to know them better. Like when I remember somebody's name, I know that I'm getting to know them. It takes me 2, 3, 4 times to remember somebody's name. Yeah. But so I'll invite them, come and see. I'll just see where the conversation goes, because I think certain times I meet people who are just, man, they're ready to share everything. Yeah. And they're comfortable with hearing everything.
And oftentimes you don't have time for that.
Exactly.
You're like,
but
bro, I'm in the middle of my second set.
Right.
Do you see this pump I got going on?
But then later on, it's like, there's a guy that's been coming to church for 2 or 3 months, and I just recently sat down with coffee with him, heard his story, and he's not a believer, but related what I thought about his story to what I think God originally designed for his life and all those kinds of things, and so share the gospel that way. And so I don't think there's ever like, I'm not a one formula guy. I just can't come up and do that.
You're almost like a Swiss Army knife. It's like whatever the situation, and that's kind of how you have to be, right? Yeah, that's kind of how you have to be with that whole thing. It's like Jesus may have you do one thing in this instance and another thing in another instance, and I mean, as long as you're listening for his voice and just doing whatever he says,
to be led, right?
For sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like you send a soldier to war, and they've got all sorts of tactical gear, and like you might use your pistol, or you might use your combat knife, or you might lay a claymore, or you might have a RPG, right? Like, know what I'm saying?
And I think,
and yes, I'm likening evangelism and winning a soul to killing your enemy.
Right. I think, but a lot of our discomfort in that is because at a base level, we think that evangelism is offensive. Mm-hmm. We really do. I won't speak for you guys. I'll speak for myself. At times, I feel like I have something offensive, especially in the culture that we live in.
It's something like that. Yeah.
And
taboo.
Yeah,
religion, politics.
I know that Jesus is a dividing line.
Right.
Oh yeah, that's a really good.
As polarizing as our culture is right now, and this is where I think, man, you could talk church planting ministry in our culture and context, and the most polarizing pieces right now are completely anti-gospel.
Yeah.
And you could talk for days on those kinds of things. But that's where I think, again, the evangelism piece is huge. In how we plant churches. I mean, I don't think there's any getting around it.
Yeah,
absolutely. Man, this has been a good conversation.
It's been good. I'm feeling it coming to a close. Plus, I'm about to pee my pants. So, give us a closing statement. Maybe.
Oh, can I? Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
I got it. So, if you could give advice, or if you had maybe a word of knowledge, something you wanted to share with somebody who's considering planting, is in the midst of planting, I mean, any in the planting realm, what would you, if you had, 1 or 2 things that you could say to encourage, spur, challenge, I mean, what would those words be?
We 1,000% need you to plant a church. We need church planters. Jesus said that the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. So we need you to plant a church. We need you to dream big. We need you to come with everything that you've got to plant that church. But we need you to do it the right way. We need you to have people who have affirmed it. We need you to have a team with you and resources, and we need you to just come with everything that you can muster and do it well. And then I would just tell them, just listen to God, listen to people in your life, and be willing to not make church planting the end all. Like, don't make it the end all. Make it make it a calling. And if you're called, man, give it everything you got. Come with a great plan. If you're not, it doesn't mean you're any less of a leader, any less of a follower, any less of a person for not jumping in.
Yeah, I think you said it. Listen, like that's the biggest deal, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, Lord.
Do it and do it the right way. Yeah, for sure.
The Lord's way.
Yes.
If you're gonna make chips, make the Lord's chips.
You got to get a Nacho Libre.
You got to get a Nacho
every
Libre.
time.
Hey, where can people find you online?
I'm on Facebook, but I'm the worst social media dude out there.
So maybe just your church website.
You go to the district church, districtchurchwichita.com or
you guys
Facebook.
Post your sermons and all that stuff?
Yeah, post on.
Good.
Yep.
Awesome.
You can go on there and find them.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you may get some people from our little network that really resonated with just how you view church that may go watch a couple sermons.
Cool.
Send you some critiques. If you think he's doing a terrible job preaching, just shoot
That's right.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes.
Travis
email Brady at. That's right. Yeah. So
that's so funny. Brady's not even here.
I
He's
know,
getting ragged
and I
on.
barely even know the guy. Like I think I've seen him once in my life.
Oh man,
so that's kind of
dude.
funny.
I'm so thankful for that.
Yeah,
for
thanks
the
for
community.
coming, man.
Well, for you coming today, but also for the community that we have with some pastors here in the Wichita area, church planners. We're trying to keep that strong, and so I'm super encouraged. I'm encouraged to have more conversations about this thing. I think that God took this topic exactly where it needed to go. And man,
cool.
just thank you so much for your time and just sharing your thoughts.
And you can tell people it's not that bad coming on the podcast.
Right.
So
absolutely, it's a lot of fun.
You only never mind.
Go for it.
I lost my train of thought.
You lost your train of thought.
I got nothing.
Awesome.
Happens all the
It was
time.
good to have you, man.
Yeah, appreciate it, guys. Had a lot of fun.
All right, listeners, saltydogspodcast.com. Email us,
Yes, please send us some email.
saltydogspodcast@gmail.com. We want to hear from you.